regulator and weather station utilization. It looks like Ben is the first component here of this talk, so come on up.
Come on down. So, welcome. We're going to be talking about estimation of irrigation requirements, and there's a lot of ways of doing it. There's that way, and there's looking at the calendar, and there's sticking your thumb in the ground. Actually, that's a pretty darn good way to figure out when to irrigate. But there's a digitized method that's been developed over the years. It was first developed in, of all places, Colorado. And this is back in 1975. And California adopted a program called CIMIS, California Irrigation Management Information System, that was tested by the university back in 1981 over a period of about 6 years. And over the years, it was funded by the Department of Water Resources. And eventually there were over 150 of these weather stations that were established. And these are able to determine through weather parameters what the driving force. We talked about how with climate change, we're going to see greater evaporative demand on not just the chaparral that's out in the hillsides, but also on crops. And so a longer period of lack of water means more water is being required by growers to keep that crop going. Let's see.
You can use the remote to earlier.
Oh, it's on here. Okay, so that's
yeah, the arrows work.
okay. So the driving forces of plant water use is what we call evapotranspiration, and most people think it's temperature that drives this. In actuality, it's the sun that's driving the amount of day length that's. And it's also the wind, and it's the humidity. And so humidity, wind, and day length are really the driving factors, and temperature is much less important. So we heard about the effects of temperature, but it's the humidity of the air that is really going to determine how much water is being sucked out of plants. So the drier the air, the more water is pulled out by plants, therefore the more is required to be replaced. And so when you're irrigating, you need to know how much is driving water use, and also how much water is applied to the soil and is in the soil. So an ideal irrigation is irrigating the root zone. Inefficient irrigations are irrigating less of the root zone or too much. And so in this case, irrigation in Ventura, and this is true all along the coast from San Diego to Monterey, our irrigation waters are full of salts. The more we irrigate, the more salts we put on. So it's one of these necessary evils that we do. The more irrigation water we put on, the more salts. So we don't want to put on more water or infrequently than the crop needs. We want to put just the right amount. It's, it's the three bears deal. It's, it can't be too soft, can't be too hard. It's got to be just right. And we are growing crops like strawberries and avocados that are very, very sensitive to salt. So they're very sensitive to irrigation. So irrigation scheduling is deciding how much and how frequently to water. And so the problem along the coast here is you can't irrigate according to a fixed schedule, because it's like we've seen here in the last 2 weeks. We've gone from cold, where we had the heater going, and I never turn the heater on. I don't like it. And I was turning it on. And now we've had 3 days of hot, and now we're going into cold again. And so this really confuses plants. So to irrigate on a fixed schedule is death. I say death to a lot of plants along the coast here, because one of the consequences of under irrigating is we get these leaf blights that cause leaf drop exposure of the fruit to sunburn, loss of the fruit makes them more susceptible to Santa Ana conditions. And the loss of fruit that we saw last week in those Santa Ana conditions was significant, Daisy. We lost a lot of fruit. You're going to get a lot of calls. Anyway, so there's a lot of variability in the weather patterns. And in a place like Ventura, and this is true of Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, you know, if you're right along the coast, we've got a weather station within spitting distance of the ocean. And just less than 2 miles away on Beardsley Road, we've got another one. And the difference just in that short distance is significant. There's a 20% difference, more or less than the different sites. So when you figure you're going out to Moore Park and to Santa Paula and God forbid Ojai, those are all completely different climates. And you cannot use the same irrigation schedule as you would in each of those climates. So in order to use this irrigation scheduling method using evapotranspiration weather stations, you need to know what the baseline driving force is, how much energy is coming into the system to drive it. And then we've got a correction factor called the crop coefficient, which corrects for the size and the type of crops. The difference between a cilantro plant and an avocado plant. The demands are different because they're different size, they have different shaped leaves, they're grown at different periods of time. And then we have what's called the distribution uniform, the DU, what the output of the system is, how variable is it from emitter to emitter to emitter. And so when you have a poor distribution uniformity, you have to put on more water than the crop needs in order to get enough water, adequate water onto the emitters that are putting on the least amount. So you have to up the amount of water, so you tend to over-irrigate some plants than others. And then you have a leaching fraction. So this is the amount of water you need to put on in order to remove the salts that you've just put on from the previous irrigation. So this becomes a very complicated calculation. And if you give it to an average grower like Derek, he'll figure it out. But if you give it to John Doe over here, that grower is going to go, I'm going to go back. I'm going to irrigate every Monday. Yeah. And so Andre Biscaro in our office and I were looking at the problem here in Ventura. So DWR, Department of Water Resources, requires 8 acres of grass. Okay, this reference, the station has to be on 8 acres of grass, which is nuts. They don't know what they're talking about. All the weather stations in the state are on something less than 1/4 of an acre. And when you're in a high expense environment like Ventura, nobody is going to, devote 8 acres to grass. So what we've done is we're testing the minimum area that's required to do it at Hanson. But we're also looking for areas to put up these weather stations. So we've got one at Southland Sod, we've got one at the Hanson Research Center. We're installing one at Fillmore High School. We finally got one in there. We're looking for a site in Ojai, and these are just sites like you'd expect a golf course. Golf courses don't like to put up these things. Anyway, so what we've done is we've developed a system that is simple. It eliminates a lot of the, these fudge factors. But in the end, if you have a DU, you're putting more water on, and it cancels out the leaching fraction. And some of these things work out so that Andy Lyons can come in and give us a calculation that is going to work. So I turn this over to Andy Lyons now. Forward, backwards.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you. Thank you, Ben. Thanks everyone for sticking out to the end. I am glad my co-presenter is Ben, who can keep everybody awake. But I'm the programmer on this project. Unfortunately, Andre couldn't be with us today. He and Ben are the brains. But this has been a real joy for me to work on. I am part of the Informatics and GIS statewide program. We are essentially ANR's GIS shop, and we have the privilege of providing all kinds of spatial mapping support, web application development. We've helped Tapan on some of his projects. So we're a team of programmers and data nerds. So, but this has definitely been one of my favorite projects because I'm good at the programming and I enjoy it. But to be useful, I need to work with folks like Andre. They know the growers, they know the science, they know the equipment that's out there. And I think this project, which is basically, it's a website that kind of works like a calculator on your phone. It's a good example of what we've talked about today, some of the themes that came up this morning that, part of our way forward for dealing with all this variability is going to be flexible and proactive interventions. And I think this project represents that. And it does that in a couple ways. One is that it's very localized, right? So this calculator, it's been developed specifically for this county, right? In terms of the data it's coming from and some of the assumptions about the equipment. And it's also been built to be very extensible. It's also been built to be very simple. So let me go through this here in a bit. I will show a QR code here, and if we have time, I think we probably will. We'll do if anyone who wants to can pull it up on their phone. And then I've also got some little cards with the QR code if you want to take one home and play with it or give it to your irrigator. But essentially, so Ben already mentioned one of the key factors for getting good irrigation recommendations is going to be the weather data, right? Ultimately, evapotranspiration is still the best way to measure the requirements of crops. And for that, you do need a weather station. The one hanging outside your kitchen window is not going to do it. So these red dots represent the weather stations that we're currently using in this application. Two of them have been put up by Cooperative Extension. Two of them are CIMA stations. And then those yellow stars are the ones that are coming that Ben just made a reference to. So getting better data that's closer to the orchard is strategy number one. And this graph just kind of drives that point home. Every dot on this graph represents a day. And more specifically, it represents the difference between measured evapotranspiration at two weather stations that are 2 or 3 miles apart. That Ben just referenced, the Beardley and Huemene Road, if I'm saying that correctly. But that red line, you can see half of the dots, or more than half of the dots, those represent where the Beardsley station is reporting greater evapotranspiration. And a third of the time, it's 20% more. And again, these stations are only 2 or 3 miles apart. At the size of a county, that's often not a big difference. But in Ventura, it's a really big difference, as we can see here. And 7% of the time, it's a 40% difference, right? So if you're an irrigator, depending on what side of which microclimate you're in, what weather station you can use for your recommendation it's a big deal. The way we kind of make this easier for someone who's using the calculator to work on is Andre has devised these evapotranspiration zones, right? So on the calculator, there's a little place where you select, what zone you're in based on the orchard location. And then once you do that, it'll pick the station, or in a couple of places, it'll take the average of two stations, which is going to give you a better reference for your evapotranspiration, right? So getting the data closer. So here's some highlights about the calculator. It is up and running. There's 2 versions of it, one for avocado, and then the second version, which means a different web address for celery, strawberry, cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower. So some of the vegetable crops and strawberry. And based on what crop you're using, it'll pick and your location, it'll pick the best weather station. And then the recommendation that you get, in addition to the basic water budget equation, right? How much evapotranspiration times the crop coefficient needs to be replaced. The crop coefficient is based on canopy size. So we'll see there's a drop-down box for where you set how big the plant is. The distribution of uniformity, which again It accounts for like irrigation systems are not uniform, right? They don't wet the ground completely uniformly. So there's a little boost there. The leaching fraction, which Ben mentioned, provides another little additional water to leach out the salts. And in the case of strawberries, which we know plastic mulching is standard practice, there's a factor for that. So under the hood, it's actually considering a number of, again, local production factors. South-facing slope, right? If you're trying to come up with a recommendation for avocado and your trees are on a south-facing slope, there's a little more light and a little more evapotranspiration for those trees. So there's a factor for that as well. All right. So here's how you actually use it. So it is in English and Spanish, so you can pick your language up at the top. And then really it's designed to work on a phone. There's just, what do we got here? Like 5 boxes. They're all drop-down boxes. Select your crop, select the canopy cover, and based on, whether it's a vegetable crop or an orchard, the avocados, you'll see there's some different choices there. Pick your ET zone. There's a little button, I don't know if you can see it here, but there's a little button you can just open to view that map. Importantly, what was your last irrigation date when we assume the crop was well watered or a significant precipitation, which we also assume well watered the crop. So you enter the date and then the application rate of your system. And so that's going to be your sprinklers or your drip lines. You enter the application rate. If you're not sure, or if the irrigator is not sure what the application rate is in acre inches per hour, there's a little calculator button that they can click on that will help them come up with an estimate. All right. And then after you click calculate, it'll call the weather station. It'll get the weather data for the last week or 2 weeks or however long it's been since you had the last irrigation, and it'll do the calculations. And what you see is going to be simply the recommended irrigation in inches and the recommended set time, how long you should run the system for. And that's it, right? So this is a very, very focused calculator for a very common application, right? If you do want to view the details, you can tap that little details button and you'll see a day-by-day accounting of evapotranspiration needs. All right, so that's kind of what it does. Let's, anyone who is interested in giving it a shot, take out your phone and snap out this QR code and run it. This should open up a website and hopefully it'll, I think it'll work well. Put in this is the one for avocados. So for the orchard maturity, select 40%, which I think is I forget the label of it, but 40% for your orchard maturity. In the drop-down box for your location, select zone 3. You can click on the little map button if you want to see where that is. For the last irrigation, select January 13th. That's a week ago. And for the application rate, the default should probably 0.055. I'll go ahead and do this as well.
Now you can recalculate that to gallons per hour per emitter as well.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So for avocado, if you click on the little calculator button to help you estimate your application rate, you can use either the emitter rate method, as Ben just referenced, or the flow rate method, but they'll both convert those numbers into inches per hour.
Soil is just holds the amount of water. So you don't want to, you know that you don't want to irrigate more than 2 foot of depth, right? So you can approximate that as 150 gallons per 10 by 10 foot. So you're estimating how much and not to exceed that. So you can actually put in a limit to how much you're putting on.
Yeah, so when I did it, it worked for me, and I got basically 0.6 inches and 10 hours. 9 hours and 59 minutes. Right. And again, if you click on the little details button, it'll drop down a little table, and you can see day by day how much evapotranspiration was, the crop coefficient that was used, at what weather station it was using to make these recommendations, and so on and so forth. Right. So it's designed to be really, really simple. And within 15 seconds or so, somebody can get a ballpark estimate on how long they should run their system for. That's the idea. We know it's not precise, and we know these numbers are going to vary a little bit, but it gets you in the ballpark. Right?
So that's the important thing. You run it, and then the first few times you go out and what depth did I get? And then don't exceed that applied amount. But it really is determining the frequency, not so much the amount.
All right.
So how much fudge factors in the orchard maturity part, do you think? I mean, it's a huge part of the canopy.
Yeah, there's a lot of fudge factor, but
Is it fudged
not
over?
doing it at all. This puts you within more than a fudge factor.
Okay. That's good. I mean, that's a big estimate of orchard maturity and canopy, and that'll affect this more than any other variable. The second question I might have for either you or Andy, between crops, where you pull on crop coefficient? Is there a guideline for strawberry or?
Those have been established in the past. So it's 0.86 for avocados. For gosh, I don't know. Some things like lettuce and broccoli, it's inside of 1.
They're updating it too, right? They're updating those KC values for these crops.
Yeah, it's just what's been identified.
Yeah.
Yeah, currently, so the reason you select your canopy cover is to select a crop coefficient for that size of the plant. And currently you're using a table from FAO that's been established, but Andre and others who have looked at it, and they have made some adjustments. And again, they've been adjusted for your canopy size. And I think in 2026, there is some more recent California specific crop coefficients that we're planning, which might vary, in addition to canopy size, might vary month to month. Yeah, there's a lot of details under the hood. If you're at all interested, Andre would love to talk to you. He really nerds out on this. We are seeking collaborators for those additional weather stations, as Ben has mentioned. They've identified sites for some of the ones that they've already got funding for to set up. But please get in touch with Ben if you or you might know someone who might have a site for another weather station. And I'll stop here. These are the QR codes for both versions of the calculator, and I'll leave some cards up here if you want to take one home. And any questions? Yeah, there.
When does the app version come out?
So good thing that you
Is it?
So actually, if you relatively recently, if you in your Safari or Chrome or whatever you're using on your Android device, if you go click on the dots and say add to home screen, it'll make a little icon for you on the home screen. And it's still a website, but it works just like an app, right? You launch it from that icon on your yeah. That's a different problem. You might need to extend your app screen. I know that.
What?
Great groups. Anything else? Oh, nothing on that?
Nothing, yeah.
Okay. Great.
Well, thank you so much, Andy and Ben. With that, we've actually reached the end of our long day of presentations. I know we've learned a lot. And great questions, great, especially the Goro panel was very insightful, and I just want to thank all of you for sticking with the program. Also, people online for sticking out with us. Thank you very much. Also, I want to say a special thank you to Lillian and Kagendra, especially Lillian, you're very resilient, dealing with all the technical issues. Kagendra and also Julie Clark, who helped with the registration and all the setup, all the logistics of the program. And Kurt will have information for those of you who are seeking continuing education credits. He has a sign-up list if you want to do it in person, or we also have the QR code for those people online who we will put the QR code online for the continuing education credits as well. And if you're having any problems, do contact us. I guess it's maybe Julie if you're having any problems signing up for your credits.
And take some quiches home from Churchill Rack.
Yeah, they're delicious.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Take care.